Ariadne Eldir is a young girl, the heiress of Duke Eldir, who is no longer alive. Standing in front of the window on this sunny day, Ariadne thought that her fate changed on the day she was born. At that moment, a maid approached the girl and said that it was time for them to go. Turning around, Ariadne looked at the woman with determination in her eyes and the persistent thought that she must survive. The girl walked with the maid along spacious marble corridors filled with furniture with gilded trim. Suddenly, Ariadne saw something that completely captured her attention. It was the slightly open palace door. At that moment, she was literally filled with thoughts that she could not miss this chance. She definitely had to escape from here. Suddenly, voices were heard from behind the door, as if someone was swearing and arguing and talking about how they loved each other and that her death was the fault of the monsters. Through the slightly open door, Ariadne saw two men, a young one and an older one, and how they were arguing among themselves, while the older man kept repeating that he did not believe the other. A young, fair-haired man in a beige suit echoed that she was a fragile woman who had never dealt with monsters, and he himself was in great shock from all of this. At these words, the elderly man shouted that he should have saved her, and Ariadne froze in place. Through the crack of the door, tears could be seen flowing down the young man's cheeks. He said that the woman believed that she was unworthy to be a holy virgin if she left this world. The girl listened carefully to the conversation, trying to understand what was being said. The young man covered his face with his hand, wiping away tears and saying that he would never be able to forgive himself for what happened. The maid let go of Ariadne's hand, rushed forward and hurried to close the door behind which the men stood. But the girl guessed what was happening and decided to ask the servants if they were talking about her mother. The maid only took the baby by the hand, saying that it did not matter, and that the Duke apparently was still busy, and they should wait a little longer. The girl turned away from the gilded door, but guesses did not leave her mind because she knew who was there. The elderly man was none other than Solon Garcia, a talented magician who had received the title of Grand Magician of the Empire, her grandfather. The second man was her father, whom Solon hated because his daughter, Ariadne's mother, became pregnant very early, and he even abandoned her and came here only 8 years later, having heard the news of her death. Ariadne thought that he was behaving exactly the same as in the novel, doubting the death of her mother. The girl clenched the hem of her dress in a small fist as memories came flooding back to her. She remembered how her mother suddenly opened the doors of the hall where Ariadne was sitting and walked inside, shouting her daughter's name. Seeing her, the woman covered her face with her hands in shock, her eyes filled with tears. She ran up to her daughter and began to examine her hands, covered with scars, but the girl did not understand anything, because her father said that this is how she should learn. Tears flowed down the woman's cheeks, and she told Ariadne that she should no longer learn such things. She would not allow it. She knelt down in front of her daughter and hugged her tightly, continuing to talk through her tears about how sorry she was. Then Ariadne remembered how her father took her in his arms and told her that her mother had gone on a long journey. But he promised to tell her exactly where she went if she completed her task well. Hearing this, the girl's eyes lit up with joy. Her father smiled along with her. He asked her if she would do what was required of her, and the little girl happily agreed, hugging the man tightly. Now, remembering all this, Ariadne did not feel that joy at all. From behind the door, an adult man could again be heard. He said that since he had come here, he wanted to see his granddaughter. The maid invited the girl to go inside, but warned her that she should behave carefully with the guest. The door opened and she saw her father in front of her. He asked Solon if he knew the name of his granddaughter. The girl took a step forward, and her father introduced her, calling her by name, Ariadne Eldir. The man said that she was 7 years old, but Solon replied that he already knew that and threw a dissatisfied look at the girl. The blonde man told Arya to say hello to her grandfather, and the girl curtsied. Seeing her grandfather's stern look, Ariadne realized that now he was clearly thinking that she was not at all like her mother. Solon waved his hand towards the girl, beckoning her to come closer. Arya thought that in the novel at that moment the little girl rushed to her father, the Duke. After all, children feel whether people like them or not, and according to the plot of the novel, grandfather hated her. Ariadne thought that she could have done the same thing, but she knew well what was in that novel. The girl frowned, clenching the fabric of her dress in her fists as her father tried to calm her by holding her shoulders. But at that moment, Arya rushed forward, breaking away from her father's arms. She ran up to her grandfather and grabbed his robe with her small hands. The magician looked at her in surprise. Looking into his eyes, she began to beg him to take her away from here, because even though her grandfather hated her, he was definitely better than her father. Solon did not understand what was happening and continued to look at the girl and how she was grabbing at his clothes. Ariadne understood that she could not say everything directly in the presence of her father, and she could only hope that her grandfather would understand and not leave her. At that moment, a hand fell on her shoulder and squeezed it slightly. She turned around and saw her father's face, darkened with anger. He sullenly told her that he told her not to behave like that with guests, but the girl did not give up and continued to pull at the fabric of her grandfather's clothes. Solon turned to her, took her hands, and asked if she really wanted to leave with him. Arya's eyes filled with joy, and she replied that she really wanted it. The grandfather knelt down in front of his granddaughter, stroked her head, and said that although he did not expect this, he did not mind taking her with him. The Duke was indignant, saying that it was dangerous, but the girl grabbed the magician's hand, pressing herself closer to him. Solon decided to remind him of who he was and that he could take the girl, to which the Duke replied that she was as weak as her mother, Gloria. The magician gloomily answered him that he himself raised Gloria, so he need not worry about Ariadne. He said that since the girl wanted to go with him, then so be it, and he would be glad to keep her company, since he could not be with her before. Telling the Duke that he could pick her up later, he was about to leave the hall when a blond man shouted after them to stop, otherwise he would have to use force. The Duke shouted, ordering Ariadne to return. However, these words did not frighten Solon at all. He turned to the Duke and decided to remind him that it was he who held the title of Great Magician. The Duke's expression immediately changed to one of fear, and he put his hands forward out of fear. He said that this was a kidnapping, to which the magician suggested that he report this to the palace and see what the emperor would answer him. The Duke rushed after his daughter and the man, begging them to return, but they silently disappeared behind the door of the hall. After some time, Ariadne and her grandfather were already riding in a horse-drawn carriage. The girl looked out the window at the castle in which she had lived her whole life, and could not believe that she had finally managed to get out. She then looked at her grandfather, thinking that he didn't really want to see her. Solon asked Arya what she was so afraid of, and the girl was surprised, since this was definitely not in the novel. The magician did not understand why she so wanted to run away with a stranger, and the girl wondered why he was so gentle with her. A tear rolled down the girl's cheek, and her grandfather assured her that she was now safe and could tell everything. Arya felt that she had to explain everything to him, that she was ready for a deal. But tears continued to flow down her cheeks, and she did not understand why. Solon held the girl close to him, telling her that she could cry if she wanted. Ariadne clung tightly to the man, clutching his clothes in her hands. The next moment she began to roar, pouring out all her emotions. After a while, the girl remembered the legend according to which Ariadne Eldir, despite the power of the saint, could not reveal it and met her death at the age of 16, and she learned about her fate at the age of 7. Memories took Arya to the office in the castle, where her father prepared elixirs. He turned over his shoulder, holding strange flasks of liquid in his hands. Behind him, Ariadne sat on a chair, her hands pressed tightly to the armrests and her head bowed. The father approached the girl, opening the flask, and she gasped in fear. He came close to her, leaning over her ear and putting his arm around her neck, and whispered that she should not be afraid. Then he squeezed his hand tightly on her shoulder and said he wouldn't hurt her because he loved her. Ariadne screamed heart-rendingly, but her words seemed to become an echo, and she herself seemed to crack like broken glass. The girl seemed to have fallen asleep. She barely remembered her name and how old she was. She seemed to be floating through fragments of memories, but she didn't even know what those memories were. Images of people talking on the phone and roads full of cars flew before her. And then she realized these were memories of the whole 28 years she had lived. These were memories of her past life. Suddenly, a bright light poured into Ariadne's face, and she even covered her face with her hands, resisting it. But when she opened her eyes, she found herself in a place unfamiliar to her, which, apparently, was a library. The girl went to the shelves with books. There were fairy tales, collections of poems, detective novels, and histories. All the shelves were literally filled with books. And then she realized that this place was nothing more than a library of memories. Arya's attention was drawn to a stack of black-bound books on the lowest shelf. There were about 10 such books in total, and the girl took one of them. She placed it on the floor in front of her and opened it, beginning to read. And then she saw something that incredibly surprised her. Among the lines of the book, she saw her name, Ariadne Eldir. The girl understood. It was a novel that she read in her past life. The main character there was Axel Valentine. He had the ability to go back in time, and he wanted to use his ability to save the world from demonic creatures. However, despite his best efforts, the world fell and the romance ended. According to the plot, Ariadne Eldir did not live long, and the little girl could only admit that she was the very heroine of the novel. It was said that Duke Franz Eldir had 2 daughters, but his natural daughter, Ariadne, died at the age of 16, and he recognized his adopted daughter, Helen, as heir. Everyone considered her a genius, but the power she used did not belong to her. She used the Holy Maiden technique to extract the soul, and thanks to the artifacts that the Duke made, Helen was able to become the master of spirits. And despite the fact that Ariadne is practically not mentioned in the novel itself, the reason for her death at such a young age was obvious to the girl. A tear of resentment rolled down Arya's cheek. She remembered what her father did to her, how he mocked her. And although she was only 7 years old, remembering her past life, she realized that all this was completely abnormal. Ariadne did not understand how the Duke could do this to his own daughter, and at the same time say that he loved her. She remembered his words that her mother had simply gone on a trip. And at that moment it dawned on her, perhaps he himself killed her mother. But if he killed her, then nothing will stop him from killing Ariadne herself. At that moment, the girl realized that her father, Franz Eldir, was a dangerous man. But she was determined. She would definitely find out the truth and change the ending of this novel. But in reality, she was still unconscious, her grandfather hugging her. He shouted to the coachman to hurry up. The man whipped the reins and the carriage moved faster. Soon a huge, rich mansion with a beautiful garden appeared on the horizon, with snowy mountains rising behind it. The carriage drove inside through the black wrought iron gates. One of the servants who was inside the castle saw guests arriving through the window. He hastened to report to his master, a gray-haired, middle-aged man, that the magician had returned, to which he replied that he had not expected his arrival so early. The man in the gold-embroidered uniform added that even though Gloria's death is now being investigated, Solon continues to insist on conducting a personal investigation. The servant hastened to add that the magician most likely did not come alone. At the same moment, the men heard Solon, who was shouting that his granddaughter was dying. The servant did not know that the great magician had a granddaughter, but his master guessed that it was Ariadne Eldir, but still did not believe that he could bring her, because his father did not care about anyone except the master himself. But suddenly he thought that his father could simply kidnap the girl from her palace. Quickly throwing on a white fur coat, the man hurried out into the street, swearing at the top of his voice that the old man was completely crazy. Time passed, and Ariadne finally woke up, and through her blurred vision she saw high ceilings and walls with gold trim directly above her. And then she realized that she was in some strange place. Did she lose consciousness on the way? At that moment, the door of the room opened and a maid appeared on the threshold. Her face lit up with joy when she saw that her lady had woken up, and she went inside to put out fresh linen for her. At this moment, Arya, trying to get out of bed, staggered. The maid instantly rushed to the girl, saving her from falling. The girl helped Ariadne to her feet and warned her that it might still be difficult for her to move on her own. She sat the girl back on the bed, covered her with a blanket, and offered to light a fire in her room so that she would not catch a cold. Ariadne turned to the girl, and she smiled sweetly in response. The girl looked at her in surprise and at the same time fascinated because she no longer remembered the last time someone smiled at her. The servants working for her father, the Duke, did not even look her in the eyes. Arya asked the maid what her name was, and she answered that her name was Lucy. They smiled, looking at each other, and the girl was very happy about this. It was very pleasant for her. Lucy said that she was glad to see Arya in a good mood, because she had been worried about her all this time, and then the girl tensed, still not understanding how long she had been unconscious. At that moment, a gray-haired man burst into the room, pushing away everyone in his path. A young man in a green frock coat, trying to squeeze into the room, was unhappy that the gentleman decided to come in before the doctor. The man apologized and let the boy inside. He adjusted his glasses and smiled as he greeted the little lady. Without removing the smile from his face, the young man approached Ariadne's bed and asked if he could examine her. And then Arya saw something that scared her very much. It was the doctor's clothes. The memory of how a male doctor in exactly the same clothes said that she was healthy flashed before her eyes again. In response to this, her father only grinned and said that in that case, he would continue his business. She remembered that a doctor in the same clothes examined her every time before her so-called lessons. Ariadne realized that she did not like this man and grabbed Lucy's sleeve, seeking her support. And although the maid told her that it was just a doctor, the girl completely refused to let him near her. She thought that if she turned out to be healthy, she would have to start those ill-fated lessons again. And then the young man leaned towards her. He introduced himself as Jalen Brown, the Weaver family doctor, and then Ariadne timidly greeted him back, beginning to realize that she was most likely at the Weaver house now. Jalen extended his hand towards the girl, once again asking if he could examine her. Ariadne was told that she had been unconscious for more than 10 days, and that during this time her muscles had become a little unaccustomed to movement. But the girl thought that her father must now be worried about her. Arya was still a little nervous despite the fact that the doctor looked very friendly, but she still extended her hand to him, and Jalen was surprised because the girl extended her left hand. He asked if she was right-handed, to which Ariadne answered in the affirmative, and then the young man began the examination, promising that he would do everything quickly. When the examination was completed, Jalen left the room and turned to the gray-haired man, not understanding why the girl was afraid of him, to which the man said that her weakness due to loss of consciousness was most likely to blame, and added that her mother, Gloria, also didn't like doctors as a child. But the doctor understood that something didn't add up, and it was something more than just a fear of doctors, especially since she also had other injuries. Seeing the question in the master's eyes, Jalen said that even though Ariadne was right-handed, she reflexively extended her left hand, which meant that she never showed her right hand to the doctors. He asked if they had seen the wounds on her arm when they brought her in, and added that she had become good at hiding them. The gentleman did not understand who could have done this to her, but the doctor replied that she had wounds all over her body, as well as intestinal problems, and based on all this, he came to the conclusion that she was tortured with the permission of her father, the Duke. The gray-haired man was lost in thoughts that he had previously thought that the marriage of Gloria and the Duke was a good decision, because the Eldir family was one of the most influential in the empire, and the Duke's character was not bad, and he doted on his wife and daughter. He thought that Gloria would be truly happy with him, but that hope was shattered. Throwing away his thoughts, the man knocked and entered Arya's room, asking the maid to leave them alone. Arya thought that this man seemed to be her uncle. She looked at him and decided that he was angry with her, and began to think about what might have happened if, after becoming pregnant, her mother had decided to stay with her family. The girl timidly greeted her uncle, knowing that his name was Ernest Weaver, and asked forgiveness for the trouble, promising to thank the man for accepting her. Ernest was surprised that she was acting so maturely for a little girl, for which Ariadne apologized, deciding that she had behaved too impudently, and now she could be sent back to her father. But the man sat down on her bed and said that she was not what to apologize. He gently placed his hand on her head, saying that it was his own fault for not being able to help her in difficult times, but assured her that now everything would be fine. Ariadne was surprised at how warmly he treated her, and was about to ask why when Ernest interrupted her, saying that she could call him uncle. He said that this was her room now and she could stay here as long as she wanted, but Arya was surprised, deciding that it was too much for her alone. She said that her last room was nothing like this one. It was much smaller and didn't even have windows. Ernest thought that the Duke was only pretending to be a loving father, but in fact he not only beat the girl, but also did not allow her to live in good conditions. The man swore under his breath at the Duke, and a blizzard seemed to swirl around him. Arya felt cold, and then she realized that Sir Weaver was an elemental knight, and it was his spiritual power that she had read about in the novel. But in real life, everything was even more exciting. The girl was worried by her uncle's silence, since spiritual power began to break out if the knight was agitated. Noticing Arya's frightened look, Ernest hurried to cover her with a blanket and said that he was very glad that she liked her new room. He then got up from the bed and headed towards the door, adding that now the girl needed to rest, but Ariadne still didn't understand why he didn't ask her anything. Ernest smiled kindly back at her, saying that there was no need to stir up difficult memories, and that she could tell about everything herself when she was ready. But Arya doubted his good intentions, since in the novel the great magician and Sir Weaver were also not indifferent to her because of her noble blood, but she wanted to know what a real family was. Deep down, she understood that family was just an illusion, a vain belief that a person would love her only because of blood ties. She was upset, realizing that neither in her past nor in this life would she be able to experience the happiness of having a real, loving family. The Duke will stop at nothing to obtain Glomus, the elixir that can make anyone an elementalist. But it was impossible to get it without Ariadne, and the Duke was only interested in her talent. She lay down on her pillow, thinking that if Ernest had problems with her father, the Duke, he would abandon her, and she would have to rely only on herself. Soon, Arianda fell asleep and again found herself in the library. But this time there was a girl there. She was sitting on the floor and reading a book. Seeing Arya, she extended her hand and called her to her. Ariadne sat down in front of her, and the girl immediately bombarded her with words about how glad she was to meet her, that she was glad to see her after so long. Seeing the sad expression on Arya's face, she asked if she was sick and if the lesson was difficult this time, to which the girl replied that she would not have come if she was sick. This girl was Pi. She is the guardian spirit of this library. Apparently, she was born along with this place. She could not read, but thanks to her lessons with Ariadne, she quickly mastered speech. Apparently, she collected all the knowledge from Arya's past life, but she herself didn't even know her name, so the girl decided to give her a new one and couldn't think of anything better than to name her after the number pi. Ariadne's body suffered constant pain from her activities, but thanks to Pi, who was always happy for her, she was able to endure it. Arya asked if Pi had completed her assignment, and she immediately jumped to her feet and walked towards one of the bookshelves. Soon she pulled out 2 cones from there, with yellow and red liquid. Pi's library was a great place to hide things, which is why Ariadne smuggled the elixirs here when she ran away from her father. Waking up, Arya began to prepare for dinner with Sir, and Lucy actively helped her in this, choosing an outfit for her and apologizing for the fact that it was too old, but the girl really liked it. Ariadne wondered who might have worn this dress before, since her uncle had a son, and suggested that it might have been her mother's dress. The girl felt strange. She was wearing her mother's dress and was walking down the stairs that her mother used to run to as a child, since in her past life she didn't even know who her mother was and had never seen her. Realizing that she had lost her too early in both her lives, she felt intense sadness and missed her mother. But soon Arya and Lucy arrived at the dining room. Ernest came out, his gaze stern. The girl did not understand why her uncle was looking at her like that, and after a moment, Ernest turned away from them, saying that he would order the seamstress to sew new clothes for her. Arya realized that he must not have liked that he was wearing her mother's clothes, but in fact the man was upset because the sight of Gloria's favorite dress reminded him of his little sister, who was no longer alive. He frowned, deciding that since Ariadne's father had not bought her normal clothes, he would buy them himself for his only niece. The girl followed him and sat down at the table, which turned out to be too large for her, and Ernest was indignant that he could not even see his niece's face. In a murderous tone, he ordered the servant to bring Ariadne a new chair suitable for her. When everything was ready, the man sat the girl down next to him and said that she could eat whatever she wanted. Ariadne frowned, thinking that she would need to chew her food thoroughly so as not to inconvenience her uncle, and decided that they would need to talk after dinner. The girl was haunted by disturbing thoughts, and Ernest silently watched her eat. He couldn't believe that he could eat so nicely, but the servant hastened to correct him. At that moment, the man collected his thoughts and decided that since his niece was so alarmed, he had to protect her. Obviously, he was not watching his expression at that moment, and when Ariadne looked up at him, she froze in horror. Ernest glared at her, his eyes blazing with bright blue fire, and the servant again hurried to pull the man down. At that moment, another servant approached the girl, putting another plate of food for her, and smiled sweetly. Arya looked up at the servants and realized that they were all looking at her and smiling. They were not like the servants in Eldir. Only her father, the Duke, smiled at her there. Remembering her past life, the girl realized that she had never been favored. but she just wanted to be loved. So now the only right decision for her was to make a deal with her uncle. She turned to Ernest, saying that she had something to show him. The man leaned over to wipe her face with a handkerchief and said that she had eaten too little. Thinking that she had violated etiquette in this way, Arya lowered her head and timidly apologized, adding that she would not make such a mistake again. Ernest smiled kindly at her and said that she was only 7 years old and she did not have to act like an adult. But the girl was still afraid that she might simply be kicked out of here and asked her uncle to call the great magician. She added that he should take a look at what she wanted to show, and Ernest decided to clarify exactly what it would be. Arya said that she wanted to tell what her father did to her. The man's eyes filled with surprise and anger. He ordered the butler to call the magician. The servant replied that the old man had not left the Western Tower for several days, but Ernest asked to be told that if he did not come, he would send Ariadne back to the Duke. Literally 5 minutes later, an angry magician flew into the hall, shouting at Ernest. He grabbed him by the chest, asking if he really wanted to die at his hands for such words about Ariadne. Then the magician turned around and saw that Ariadne was sitting on the couch, safe and sound, and looking questioningly at the men. Ernest displeasedly asked his father how long he was going to hide in the tower, and whether he really didn't want to see his granddaughter. Arya understood that the great magician hated her, and therefore asked him to tolerate her presence for just a little while, since she wanted to show something. And as soon as the old man said that this was not so, the girl handed the men the cones with elixirs that she had hidden in Pai's library. Looking determined, she said that she would show them how to get rid of the impurities. The men were horrified and immediately rushed to the girl. It was urgent to take these elixirs far away from her, but they didn't have time, and Ariadne poured the red liquid right onto her hand. The girl's skin was burned with black flames, an ominous aura began to creep around her. Arya's hand was covered in terrible bruises, blood dripping from her fingers. Ernest knew he had to cut off the infected hand before the contamination spread throughout his body. However, the girl said that everything would be fine with her, that she would not die, and the man did not even understand why she was saying this. Ariadne took a bottle of yellow liquid and poured it onto her affected arm, and in a moment her skin looked healthy again, without a single wound. The men could not believe their eyes, and the girl explained that this was a special elixir that allowed them to get rid of impurities. Her voice filled with sadness, and she added that this was exactly the experiment her father, the Duke, had performed on her. Solon knelt down in front of the girl, examining her hand, and Ernest still could not believe that the Duke dared to mock his own daughter like that. Arya said that he often carried out such experiments, and the scars on her arms served as proof of this. And then the man remembered Jalen's words that the little lady's poor condition could very well be caused by pollution. Ernest knew that if she was infected, she wouldn't have long to live. The men were in complete despair because they hoped that in reality everything was not so. Arya said Duke started doing this to her when she was 4 years old, when he realized the girl had good compatibility with the elements. Solon pressed the girl's hands to his face. He was shaking with sadness. He thought that it was all his fault, but the girl said that she would prepare a new elixir if he listened to her request. This elixir was like poison, and except Ariadne herself, no one could withstand it. The girl was willing to complete the elixir, as long as she was given the right ingredients and protected until she became an adult. She bowed her head and added that she did not want to return to Eldir. The men remained silent, and this reaction frightened the girl. She was about to add that they should not rush into a decision when Ernest handed her the flask and asked if it was all the contaminated essence. Arya decided that the men wanted to watch her action again, but Ernest hastened to stop her because the girl was experiencing severe pain from the effects of this elixir. Ariadne didn't understand why the men were so upset because she showed them how the essence worked. Ernest and Solon hastened to assure the girl that they were not afraid of the Duke and would definitely help her. The knight left the room, calling the butler to him, and Solon turned to Arya and asked if she hated him because he could not save her from this nightmare. The girl replied that she did not hate him at all because he did not know what was happening, but the old man himself continued to reproach himself for this. And although Ariadne assured him that this was not his fault, the magician hated himself for not being able to protect his only granddaughter. For the girl, all this was incomprehensible, because in the novel, Ariadne was only a child for Solon, because of whom his daughter died. Sometime later, Ernest returned to the room with a contract that guaranteed Arya all the protection she needed. The girl could only sign it, but she didn't understand. Didn't she also need to write down her responsibilities to them? After all, there is no benefit for men to protect her just like that. But Ernest assured the little lady that they didn't need her. Ariadne insisted that thanks to this elixir, they could get a lot of money, and they should take advantage of this opportunity. But Ernest didn't need all this, because the only thing he really wanted was to become a real family for Arya. Having signed the contract, the girl left the room and the men were very pleased that everything turned out that way. They noticed that as soon as the contract was concluded, real relief appeared on the girl's face, because she finally felt protected. But Solan still couldn't come to his senses. He remembered their first meeting with Arya and how she grabbed onto him, begging him to take her. He had never heard such a desperate plea. It seemed to him that if he had come earlier, perhaps he could have saved Gloria. But Ernest had a different mindset. He had to prepare for battle, because he wanted to make the Duke of Eldir pay for everything. It was necessary to gather the Snow Leopard Knights, who were in many ways superior to the Eldir Knights. However, Solan told his son that he should not get involved in politics, and the man was perplexed by this answer. The old man decided to remind him that he was still the Grand Mage of the Magic Tower, as well as a member of the continent's magical consulate, and he knew what he was talking about. Through a logical chain, he proved to his son that if the subjugation of the labyrinth ceases, then Ernest's wife, Celiana Kizelis, may suffer. The magician was very angry that such obvious things were so difficult for his son to understand. He advised him to investigate, and he would take care of Ariadne himself. He also asked him to find out about Gloria's accident. Ernest thought about it because last year there was an accident in a horse grave, not far from the Duchy of Eldir. The horse grave was a low-level labyrinth, so the Knights of the Golden Horn should be able to handle it with ease. Gloria led the pollution cleanup team and was the first to enter the danger zone, but this time the group was a little larger than usual. Clearing the low-level area was not dangerous since there were no monsters there, but as soon as Gloria entered there, she showed signs of contamination and died. This was the generally accepted version, but did Solan really not find anything strange in it? The magician replied that everything was clean, but nevertheless, the essence that Ariadne brought would be enough to test for poisons. If she was poisoned, then even a drop would be enough to cause infection, and thus the Duke could get rid of Gloria. With this conclusion, Solan headed for the exit, once again advising his son not to get involved in politics. Meanwhile, Arya was rereading the contract in her room, and now she felt truly calm. She did not expect that the men would decide to take this step, but she was glad that everything turned out differently than in the novel. Things were not at all as they should have been, but were their intentions sincere? The way they looked at Arya was similar to the look of her mother, who tried to save her from the experiments until the end. Her uncle and grandfather looked at her with the same loving and warm gaze. Ariadne really hoped that they would truly become a real family for her. Time passed, and Arya and her uncle went for a walk in the greenhouse, and the man was so filled with thoughts of protecting the girl that he even decided to carry her in his arms, not allowing her to walk on her own. He said his grandfather built this place for his grandmother, and she, in turn, bewitched this greenhouse so that little Ernest could walk here. Suddenly, Ariadne noticed her grandfather, who was hiding behind one of the trees and spying on them. Realizing that he had been noticed, the old man hastened to retreat. Arya and her uncle approached the window, and the girl wondered when the blizzard would end, to which Ernest replied that it would happen in the spring, when her aunt and cousin returned. Ariadne's cousin was Eric Weaver, a friend of Axel Valentine, the main character of the novel, a brilliant magician who became an archmage. And most importantly, he was the one who could change the end of history. Arya thought that she needed to gain his trust at any cost, and the man assured that her relatives would definitely be happy to see her. Soon they returned back to the castle, and the servants were frankly perplexed to see their strict master acting so carefree with the little girl. Ernest carried Arya to her room, and then the butler burst into them, announcing that a guest had arrived at the castle. Arya decided to eavesdrop on the conversation between the knight and his servant. She was also wondering who could arrive at such an hour. It turned out that the guest came without warning, and then they mentioned the last name, Eldir. Ariadne couldn't believe it. Had her father, Duke Eldir, really come for her? She didn't expect it to happen so soon, but nevertheless, she had a contract, and that calmed her down a little. A young man entered Ernest's office and introduced himself as Rictus Belbarta, a knight of the Golden Horn. But Ernest himself was clearly not happy with the guest. Rictus handed him a letter, saying that it was sent by Duke Eldir, who was very worried about his daughter. But Ernest only crumpled the letter and threw it at the knight's feet. Rictus grinned, saying that his master ordered him not to leave the lady a single step. However, the man flatly refused to give him the girl, saying that she was resting. The young man grinned. Was the lady really in captivity? Sir Weaver frowned angrily, answering that he was not like Mr. Eldir. At that moment, the guards burst into the office. They grabbed Rictus and those who came with him. Ernest ordered a greeting according to Weaver tradition. At this time, Ariadne was in the library with Pi. She even grabbed cookies from her world for her. Pi really liked this treat, and Arya promised to bring more next time. While Pi was enjoying the sweets, the girl was looking for information about Eric Weaver in books. And just as she found his first appearance in the novel, Pi grabbed her hand. She screamed that Arya was in danger and they needed to leave immediately. Pi touched her palm to the girl's forehead, and many spells swirled around her hand. Once they were ready, she aimed them at Arya. The next moment, the girl woke up in her room. Pi must have thrown her out of space. Ariadne looked out the window. It was already late evening outside, and she couldn't believe that she had slept for so long. And then she realized that in fact it was not evening, but before she even had time to step aside, an ominous clawed shadow appeared on the window. A moment passed and the window was already broken. A huge ice bird flew into the room with a rider on top of it. Ariadne recognized him as a knight of the Golden Horn, one of those who arrived today. But what was he doing here? The man dismounted from the bird and called the girl to him, saying that he intended to return her home. Ariadne was terrified. She definitely didn't want to go back. The knight realized that apparently he would not be allowed to do everything in a good way, and he reached out his hands to the girl. At that moment, a bright blue lightning appeared between them. A moment later, Solon appeared there. He was furious that this bastard dared to touch Ariadne. The horseman retreated, not wanting to fight the great magician, but still hoped to take the girl with him. Solon told him that he would let him go alive if he left in an amicable way, but the man clearly did not want to be underestimated. He took a flask of red elixir from his pocket and threw it up. As soon as she was above the magician and the girl, he smashed her with a beam directly from his palm. Arya realized that it was the essence of pollution and could not be stopped by ordinary magic, so she rushed forward. She closed her eyes, preparing to feel incredible pain, and the knight did not understand what was happening here. However, Solon arrived in time and covered the girl with his cloak. The essence dripped onto him, burning through the blue fabric. Advising the knight to read more about his legendary battles with monsters, the magician released the brightest lightning directly from his fingers. They touched the evil rider and he gasped in pain. Not wanting to deal with such powerful magic anymore, he hastened to hide. When Solon ran to the window, the knight had already flown away on a bird. Then he returned to Ariadne again. He was furious that she threw herself right under the spilling potion. And although Arya assured him that nothing would have happened to her, the magician did not let up. He hugged her tightly, telling her that he should be the one protecting her, not the other way around. Ariadne realized that it was incredibly warm in the arms of the great magician. Having calmed down, Solon took the girl in his arms and carried her for a walk around the castle, saying that her uncle had already dealt with the uninvited guests. He said there was only one of them left. He was left so that he could take care of his wounded comrades and bring them home alive. After all, guests should be treated with mercy, right? Ariadne was afraid that all this would have consequences, because in the novel, the Eldir are a powerful family with power and wealth. But her grandfather assured her that the Duke could be angry as much as he wanted. There was nothing wrong with that. Suddenly, Ernest came out to meet them. Solon immediately attacked him with questions about how these scoundrels were able to enter the estate, and began to complain that he could not wait for the return of his daughter-in-law, Celiana. Ernest was outraged that his father trusted her more than his own son, but he reminded him of the 289 battles that the knight lost to his wife. Quickly changing the subject, Ernest extended his arms towards Arya, intending to take her. But Solon hit him on the palm, saying that he was constantly dragging it around anyway. He picked the girl up in his arms, telling her to just be a child and not be sad about anything. And then Ariadne remembered how the elderly woman told her that she was disgusting and did not look like a child at all. Ernest previously said that she is only 7 years old and does not have to act like an adult. In the novel, Ariadne is a child who is destined to die, but she remembers her past life. And now she has the opportunity to survive. Her reluctance to give up gave her these memories, but now she definitely couldn't be a simple child. She would always have to act carefully, and her constant wariness made her hate herself. Arya apologized to the men for not acting like a normal child. Ernest put his hand on her cheek and said that she had been through a lot more than a normal child, and she had the right to act more maturely. It was not her fault. It was sad that Arya's childhood was taken away from her, but no one was going to blame her for it. Solon added that he was sad to see her relying only on herself. After all, they are family. Ariadne just wanted to hear from them that they could rely on them and behave like a child, that they would be there for her and protect her. And then maybe she won't have to suffer alone. Tears rolled down the girl's cheeks, and she asked the men if she could really trust them. Solon hugged her tightly, and Ernest squeezed her hand, telling her that she could not doubt it. The magician also said that she could call him grandfather, and then Arya could not stand it and roared at the top of her voice. Ernest also wanted her to call him uncle, but the old man pretended not to notice him. He hurried to take the girl away from here, and the knight ran after them. At this time, the situation in Eldir Castle was tense. The Duke was annoyed that the attempt to take his daughter was unsuccessful, and then he realized that he would have to go to extreme measures to bring his daughter back home. Time passed, and Ernest decided to take Ariadne for a walk. They were going to meet Eric, and the girl couldn't wait for him to arrive. The maids ran out after her, worried that the child might have caught a cold. And now that Arya was fully assembled, they could finally hit the road. The servants saw the little lady off with tears in their eyes. They were very worried about her. Ernest asked the girl to take a step back, and a blizzard began to swirl around him. As soon as he uttered the word blizzard, a huge snow leopard appeared out of thin air. Arya realized it was a contract beast. He should not be confused with an ordinary animal. Wizards use spells to cast magic, but sometimes it is possible to make a contract with a spirit beast. This is magic that has a form. Such animals are intelligent and borrow the power of the Great Spirit. Ariadne wondered if she herself would ever meet the spirit. The Weaver family must have a great guardian spirit, and she would like to see him one day. Ernest called Arya to him and sat her in front of him astride a snow leopard. They were about to jump over the wall, and the man asked her to hold on tight. With one deft movement, the beast jumped onto the highest roof, and Ernest realized that they were just in time. And then Arya saw clouds of rising dust and snow in the distance. It was the Snow Leopard Knights. The conquering troop has returned. The first to arrive at the gate was a dark-haired woman. Ernest called her by name, Veronica, and apparently she was again taken into the thick of it. It was Veronica Bronte, the Snow Leopard Knight, her blue cape completely covered in bloodstains. Ernest said that she should have washed the blood off herself first, because his niece was here. Veronica did not know about her existence before, and extended her hand to greet her. But Ariadne was scared when she saw blood on her gloves. Meanwhile, Veronica was delighted, because the girl looked like a living doll. While they were chatting, a woman with long scarlet hair tied in a high ponytail ran up to them. This was Celiana Cazellas, Countess Weaver, Ernest's wife. Seeing his wife, the man immediately jumped up to her, wrapping her in a tight hug. Behind them stood a white-haired guy, dissatisfied with the fact that they were so affectionate in front of people. It was Eric Weaver, their son and a budding magician. Seeing his parents kiss, he was clearly annoyed by this picture. And just as he thought about how good it was to be the only child in the family, he saw a little girl sitting astride his father's leopard. Ariadne realized that it was Eric Weaver, and thought that he looked younger than in the drawings in the novel. Meanwhile, Veronica continued to admire the baby, but Eric wondered what she saw in her. He came closer to the girl and said that she looked disgusting, to which Veronica replied that Eric himself was far from nice. The guy was in unpleasant shock from this behavior on her part, but Veronica did not give up. She said he looked like a cow. And before Eric had time to answer her, the girl had already saddled her horse and rode out the gate. Then he turned to Ariadne again and began to shout that she had no right to sit on his father's snow leopard. He approached her and began to forcefully pull her off the animal. At the same moment, Ernest approached him and pulled his hand. The man approached the girl to check if she was injured, but Eric still did not understand what was happening. Celiana came up next, saying that she would come to meet the girl a little later, and Ernest took Ariadne back to the castle. Arya thought that the boy was still in adolescence, but nevertheless he seemed even more at ease than in the novel, so she decided to talk to him later. The maid reported to the little lady that Eric would be punished for such behavior, and Arya herself was upset that their first meeting was so terrible. She remembered Veronica and realized that she could not remember her. Then she decided to ask the maid about her, and she said that she was the same age as Eric, and nevertheless, already a knight. The novel's protagonist, Axel Valentine, became an elemental knight at the age of 12, and although Veronica was not the main character, she was clearly a genius. But Arya didn't understand why she wasn't mentioned at all in the novel. Perhaps she died at the very beginning. And then it dawned on Ariadne. She remembered how Veronica said that she would leave here if Eric became a count, and every time in the novel Eric got drunk until he lost consciousness, he repeated these words. Is Veronica really his dead lover? The legend said that for a long time, labyrinths inhabited by monsters appeared everywhere, but people did not give up and continued to fight. However, the labyrinth that appeared several decades ago changed everything. He wiped out a powerful empire in the blink of an eye, and at that moment a ray of hope appeared. Axel Valentine. He was the first person to survive in the labyrinth, and his goal was to destroy the Great Labyrinth. And later, he created the perfect squad for his mission, consisting of 5 people. These were a warlock, a mage, a witch, a priest, and an elemental knight, but practically nothing was written about the roles of the last 2, and there was no information about Veronica either. But Ariadne was sure that she was the very talent who took the place of the knight, and she decided to find out more about her. Meanwhile, the maid led the girl into the room where the woman was waiting for her. It was Celiana Kizelas. The girl curtsied, and the woman asked to call her aunt from now on. She said that her husband sent her a letter, but it got lost on the road, so she only recently found out about everything. The woman added that even the most trained knights could not have gone as far as Arya did. In this girl, she saw a warrior preparing for a new battle. She explained that a warrior does not always use weapons, and first of all, he is a person who fights to win. Ernest believed that Ariadne was very fragile, but it seemed to Celiana that unprecedented power was hidden in such a small body. In her eyes, Arya was a truly strong child. She wished Eric was the same. Celiana handed the girl a box. It was a gift for her recent birthday. Inside was a pendant with a lamp. Ariadne realized that it was a magic lamp, and the woman asked if she had one before. But the girl replied that this was the first, and this greatly surprised Celie, since by her age, Arya should have already received her lamp. Every parent is obliged to give their child a magic lamp. Celiana called the girl over and placed the pendant around her neck. She patted her on the head, telling her she had done a great job. The woman added that if necessary, she can also turn to her for help. But she asked me to keep it a secret. Ariadne went for a walk around the greenhouse and thought about why Celiana asked to keep this a secret. But on the other hand, she was glad that her relatives turned out to be good people, and she was able to finish the elixir thanks to her grandfather, and now she needed to test it. She did not understand why her fate turned out this way, why she was reborn in the body of the Duke's child, and considered this whole story with the novel absurd. But still, she caught herself thinking that she needed to find a test subject for her experiment. And then she noticed a plant, a desecrated plant that used to be a daffodil. The girl poured the elixir onto the withered leaves. A moment later, it seemed to be reborn, again taking on the appearance of beautiful daffodils. At that moment, someone approached her from behind. It was Eric, and Ariadne wanted to meet him, but not now. However, she turned to curtsy and greeted him, calling him brother. Eric was not happy about this and told her that even though she was his cousin, he did not intend to treat her well. Arya didn't understand why he was so negative, but the guy remained adamant and told her to leave here since this place was not intended for games. But Ariadne replied that her grandfather allowed her. Eric couldn't believe his ears. Was she really learning magic from him? He began to accuse her that she wanted to find out all his secrets and steal his magic techniques. Ariadne understood that she should behave politely, but still asked Eric to be more polite towards her. Eric was surprised, because this girl really scolded him, telling him that she was higher than him on the aristocratic ladder. He grabbed his shoulder, his hand shaking nervously, and then he burst out, screaming for Arya to stop making fun of him. Ariadne decided to calm him down, saying that she was only here for the experiment, and this interested Eric. He decided to find out what kind of experiment it was. He looked at the shelf with plants and was quite surprised. The once withered flowers were now blooming again, as if nothing had happened. Meanwhile, Ariadne trudged around the greenhouse. Her health had deteriorated greatly. She really wanted to rest. Eric caught up with her and, grabbing her by the shoulder, began to ask what she had done with the desecrated daffodils. When the girl turned to him, he saw that blood was coming from her nose. Eric was surprised and did not know what to do. Ariadne wiped away the blood and hastened to calm the guy down, saying that it was not his fault. But the blood didn't stop, and a moment later the girl almost fell, but Eric managed to catch her. He touched her forehead. She was literally on fire. And then he realized that at this rate she could die. Ariadne woke up, at first not understanding where she was, but she soon realized that she was in the library with Pi. The girl was very surprised when she realized that Pi had dragged her here on purpose because she was in pain, but Pi herself was very happy to see Arya. Suddenly, the baby felt that she was about to fall asleep. Pi stroked her head and told her to rest. When Arya opened her eyes, she realized that she was now in her room. Ernest, Celiana, and Lucy stood by her bed, almost crying with excitement for the little lady. Jalen soon entered the room to examine Ariadne, and all other visitors were ushered away from her bed. The doctor said that the girl had almost recovered, and when Arya moved her hand, she felt an unusual lightness in her body. And then Ernest rushed at the girl in a beige raincoat, intending to hug her and shouting words of gratitude. Arya noticed that the girl had yellow eyes. All priests have them, because if a person is endowed with divine power, his eyes turn yellow over time. The man walked out the door with the priest to discuss the details, and Celiana approached Ariadne's bed, offering her a snack after her 2-day sleep. She grinned, and Lucy immediately ran to set the table. However, Jalen had something he wanted to say. He said he had doubts at first, but is now confident. The fact is that Ariadne has lost her sense of pain. The girl didn't understand what the problem was because it's good not to feel pain, isn't it? But the doctor explained that her body would still suffer from the wounds, and this was not normal. She didn't even feel anything wrong before she fainted. Pain is a warning of danger, but Ariadne's body is now unaware of these warnings, and this is very bad. Jalen strongly recommended that she monitor the condition of her body, and added that thanks to divine power, most of the negative consequences disappeared. And while Arya can walk around the estate again, she shouldn't overdo it. The doctor left, and Celiana sat down with the girl, hugging her and telling her that she would soon make a full recovery. She fed the girl with a spoon. They say that Eric is sorry that this happened to you and offered to assign knights to the baby to protect her. At that moment, they entered the room. It was Veronica Bronte. Ariadne didn't expect to see her here. Celiana assured that despite Veronica's age, her abilities are amazing. The woman said that if Eric offends Arya, Veronica can beat him, but only without breaking bones. Ariadne was surprised. What if Eric was scolded for what happened to her, even though it was not his fault? Celiana said he immediately ran to Jalen, but said it was because of him. Meanwhile, Veronica fell asleep while standing up, but Arya hastened to say that she was just overexerted and Eric was not to blame. However, the woman said that Eric would still stick to his guns. Ariadne was very surprised that the guy did this. When the girl fully recovered, she began to work with elixirs. She distributed them among close people: grandfather, uncle, Eric, Veronica, and Pi. Although she doubted whether it would be useful to give it to Pi, since she is always in the library, Ariadne sat down on the rocking chair, thinking that she wanted to ask Pi how she managed to drag her into the library last time. The girl closed her eyes and fell asleep a few moments later. She found herself back in the library, but Pi was nowhere to be found. And then she heard a voice behind her. Pi stood behind her, but it was as if some kind of glass wall separated them. However, Pi held out the book and her hands went through the wall. She screamed that she had found something interesting. Ariadne asked how the girl could pass through this wall. Pi was very surprised that Arya couldn't do it. She happily jumped through the wall, holding the book in her hands. The girl said something that Ariadne did not hear anything through this wall. Ariadne still didn't understand anything, because she didn't know that Pi could do that. She wondered if other parts of the library were similar to the one they were in, because these were other people's memories. However, Pi said that Arya is the only visitor to this library. So the girls went back to the book, and it turned out that Pi had found information about Veronica. And then Ariadne saw something in the book that surprised her outright. This was an account of the battle in the Labyrinth of La Macha, located in the domain of Weaver. The defense was destroyed after the defeat, and the monsters caused significant damage to the city. Veronica Bronte, Knight of the Snow Leopard, 24 years old. She died protecting Eric Weaver from a monster called the Blood Hunter. But since Veronica died at 24, then this should happen in the future. But something didn't add up. Pi said that she didn't find any information about Veronica in the original novel, but there should be information about everyone in the books. The Library of Illusions is the place where all the memories of my life are stored, so Pi knows about this world and is not affected by time limits. Perhaps Pi is an entity that has access to any knowledge. This is a real scam. Ariadne decided to ask Pi to find something else. Pi happily agreed because she was so bored sitting here doing nothing. Arya wanted her to find information about Gloria Weaver's death. Pi rushed into her arms, thanking her for the new task. Arya then handed Pi the elixir. And then the girl noticed that there was an inscription on the ribbon. It was her name. She was very happy and asked Ariadne to tie this ribbon on her hair. A moment later, yellow tissue was already developing among Pi's thick blonde hair. Time passed. Ariadne returned to the real world and went for a walk with Veronica, giving her the elixir and telling her that she could use it when she was injured. But she was a little perplexed why they were on the roof, riding a contract beast, if the girl just wanted to see her brother. In response to this, Veronica admitted that she just wanted to hug the girl at least once, and it would be very troublesome to climb the stairs. The horse stamped his hoof, and a piece of tile split and fell from the roof, which Eric, as usual, was dissatisfied with. He stood below, ordering the girl to come down from the roof. The horse jumped down in one deft movement, ending up literally a few centimeters from the guy. Of course, this made him incredibly angry. He was also extremely unhappy that she brought this girl here and on her contract beast. Veronica walked up to Eric and grabbed his chest, clearly unhappy with the way he met the little lady. But Ariadne asked the girl to let him go. Eric was shocked how strong this girl was. Arya decided to give him the elixir, saying that he could learn more about it from his grandfather. Moreover, the girl wanted to apologize. She remembered that he took the blame when she fainted and wanted to know why he did that. Doesn't he really hate her at all? Eric wanted to curse, but deciding not to contact Veronica anymore, he walked away. When he left, the girl added that this guy was not worth the little lady's gifts, but Arya was sure that she did everything right. Time passed, and Ernest decided to relax in the greenhouse with his wife and niece. They discussed how the cleansing elixir works. Celiana wondered if the land would be cleansed once they cleared the labyrinth and used the elixir. Ariadne said that the elixir has an effect only on living organisms, but Celiana did not let up. She wanted to know whether it would work on the soil, but Ariadne did not know the answer to this question. It was decided that we needed to conduct a test, and if everything worked out, we would need to make even more elixir. Arya said that she could prepare more potions, but asked that information about it be kept secret. She announced that she wanted the elixir to be sold on the black market, and once word of the potion spreads, they will publicly donate the recipe to the temple. At this time, the male bird brought a message for Solon, which spoke of Ariadne's decision. He asked a woman in a rich suit trimmed with gold and pearls what she thought about it. The woman was very intrigued by this decision on Ariadne's part. The woman was Rebecca Garcia, the owner of the Garcia home. After the appearance of the Great Labyrinth, the entire territory of the Garcia house disappeared. Rebecca had difficulty finding a new refuge for her house. She was the second child of Solon Garcia, an heiress who was not interested in money or power. However, she now has unimaginable wealth. Solon and her daughter continued reading the letter, which said that Arya was ready to give the elixir to the whole world for free if it was useful. Rebecca thought that she was going to leave everything in the hands of the temple, but Solon told her that she wanted to make it herself, and the woman was very surprised at this. By donating the recipe to the temple, Arya wanted to gain its favor and also increase her reputation, but at the same time create it in large quantities, thereby capturing the market. It is difficult to buy anything on the black market, and the temple does not approve of his activities, so when the elixir goes on sale, it will be immediately sold out. Rebecca realized that donating to the temple would allow everyone to understand that Ariadne created the recipe, and when the trade began, she would have no competition. The woman called her servant Potern to find out how old this brilliant girl was. Upon learning that she was only 8 years old, Rebecca was so delighted that she wanted to make her successor, but Solon was categorically against it. After all, she was the direct heir of the Duke of Eldir. Rebecca pouted dissatisfiedly and said that she could not give up the distribution of the elixir. But Solon replied that in any case, only Arya makes the whole decision. However, the woman insisted that one of the adults should supervise this. But Solan knew that she was no ordinary child. He remembered the day when she poured the polluted essence on herself, all in order to receive protection in exchange for the elixir of purification, and at that moment he began to truly respect her. Rebecca expected nothing less from her daughter Gloria. She tried to escape from the Duke and put all her determination into the moment when she poured the contaminated essence on herself. She added that shortly before her death, Gloria contacted her. She sent Rebecca a small note with the date and place and asked her to keep it a secret. However, the meeting did not take place. Rebecca waited at the appointed place all day, but Gloria never came. And then she found out that her sister died. Rebecca even conducted her own investigation, but everything led to the same thing, an accident. The woman was interested in what Gloria wanted to tell her, but she guessed that it was connected with her husband. She could not tolerate bullying, but if this had been revealed, divorce would have been inevitable. But Ariadne was different. Solon tried to persuade Gloria to give up the child while she had the chance. Moreover, there were rumors that the Duke was a womanizer and made appointments with his mistresses immediately after the wedding, but no one believed it. And then the magician again thought that it was he who was to blame for what happened. For this reason, Rebecca did not talk about the note, and as soon as she wanted to invite the two of them to meet with Ariadne, Solon said that this time she would go to her alone. Rebecca asked him why he didn't go with her, and then he gave her a letter. It was a certificate of custody of Ariadne. But even if they present strong evidence in court, it will be very difficult to challenge the Duke's paternity rights. Solon admitted that he stole the certificate from the Duke's house and will not be punished for this. But in return, he will have to teach some members of the Emperor's family. Rebecca grinned. Duke Elder turned out to be so insignificant? But after a moment, she became serious again, realizing that even if everything is fine now, no one knows what will happen next. She did not believe that Gloria died by accident. It seemed to her that it was all because of a special poison that leaves no traces. Perhaps this is why Ariadne wants to donate the elixir to the temple, because if everyone knows about its existence, the truth will finally be revealed. Discarding unnecessary thoughts, Rebecca stood up and declared that she wanted to quickly go to her brother and see her brilliant niece. She knew that no child could think like that, and she wanted to personally meet the one who came up with this plan. Rebecca soon arrived at the Weaver estate, but was told that the Weavers themselves were not there. It turned out that they decided to go on a picnic. Rebecca arrived after them, still not believing that Ernest and his wife had finally decided to go out on a picnic. But it was true. They were all sitting right in front of her. She recognized everyone except the dark-haired girl in a blue cloak standing nearby. At first, Veronica thought that Rebecca was the enemy, but Celiana and Ernest quickly introduced the girls to each other and said that they were very glad to see Rebecca here. The girl greeted everyone, and then a little blonde girl came up to her and curtsied. She introduced herself, saying that her name was Ariadne Eldir. Rebecca pointed her finger at her, not entirely sure that this was really a living girl and not a doll. Eric intervened in the conversation, saying that Aunt Rebecca should wash her hands before touching Arya, which surprised all the other guests. However, Rebecca ignored him, walked up to the girl and said that she had come to see her niece. When everyone returned to the estate, the girl said that she already knew her story. She asked what Ariadne prefers to see, her aunt or the main shareholder Garcia. Arya thought that her name was almost never mentioned in the novel, except for one single line in which it was mentioned that she was Eric's aunt. She didn't mind the extra help, but the problem was that this time the novel couldn't help her. She didn't know anything about her aunt. However, she didn't have much choice and asked what the difference was between an aunt and a shareholder. In response to this, Rebecca began to ask her questions about kind and polite lies, which the girl did not understand at all. Ariadne didn't know how to react. The woman seemed to be on her own wavelength, but maybe she was thinking too much and Rebecca actually came to have a serious talk with her. She must have thought Arya was just her 8-year-old niece, and even though Rebecca was her mother's older sister, the girl didn't know if she could trust her. Ariadne decided that her aunt was just teasing her, and she hastened to add that in fact, she is not that stupid. Rebecca laughed, and Arya breathed a sigh of relief, realizing that her aunt was simpler than she thought. She realized that it was all not serious and called her aunt a liar. You pointed her to her eyes, saying that they were more sincere than ever. to which Ariadne told her that anyone who asks to look into the eyes to check sincerity is a fraudster. Rebecca was surprised and asked who told her that, and when Aria answered that it was her mother, her aunt's surprise immediately disappeared. As a child, when she would make fun of Gloria, she would always ask her to look into her eyes to see if she was being honest, and every time Gloria would respond the same way. Rebecca then pulled out a stack of papers, finally deciding to get down to business. It was a contract that included a sales plan, but there was more to it. Rebecca said that in order to conduct business successfully, a competent person was needed to attend meetings on Ariadne's behalf and help her with her affairs, her personal secretary. The woman selected the best candidates, and the girl was very grateful for her help. And as soon as Rebecca said that she was always ready to help, Aria asked her for help. She needed to find someone. This was the man she wanted to support. The story moves to a completely different place, to a dark-haired boy who wanders the streets in search of food. The area where he lived was polluted. There was no food or water, but still he had to look for work, and he came to a house whose door was guarded by a guard. The guy wanted to find a job here, but the guard didn't want to agree. They say that he has no skills at all, but the young man did not give up, begging to give him a chance. This seriously angered the guard, and he put his sword to the guy's sword, telling him that he would not be able to withstand even the weakest monster. However, the young man twisted his sword, knocking the weapon out of the guard's hands, causing him to become confused. The guard knelt down, not knowing what to do. The guy told him not to be afraid, because a speeding carriage would definitely run into a stone, and the guard asked who taught him these words. It was the guy's late father. Their house was located in the very center of the labyrinth. Since childhood, his father taught him the art of the sword, and after his death, the young man began to wander alone. By the age of 12, he was already used to fighting monsters. This story interested the guard, and he sent the boy to a clothing store on the alley, asking him to say that he wanted to become a cook, because there he could find people who would support him. The guy left, and the guard immediately grimaced, whispering to himself that he hoped they would like him and make him a plaything for the rich. When the guy entered the store, the smell of old clothes and leather hit him in the face. He saw an elderly woman, told her that he wanted to become a cook, and she pointed him to the warehouse door. But what the guy saw behind the door seemed to be a completely different world. In front of him was a large, luxurious table, at which a man in expensive clothes was sitting. Apparently, it was the owner. The boy told him that he wanted to become a cook, to which the man just grinned and asked who sent him here. The owner approached the guy and was about to throw him out when he noticed the color of his eyes. They were red, eyes the color of a raging flame, cursed eyes. Such children are called red-eyed. They are extremely rare. Many of them die in childhood, and the cause of their death is fire. They say that fire spirits love such children, but fires often broke out because of these spirits. Therefore, people began to hate children with red eyes, and the guy guessed that perhaps for this reason his parents abandoned him. The boy asked if the man was afraid of his eyes, to which he responded by asking the boy if he knew that fire spirits love people with red eyes. He implied that he had a very high chance of becoming an elemental knight. He stroked his hair with his hand and said that he would try to support him, and for the guy this was very unexpected, because except for his late father, no one had touched him. The man invited him to stay with him until the boy grew up, and when he agreed, the owner's eyes sparkled slyly. He invited him to sign a contract, and when everything was done, the man welcomed a new member to the chess association, Axel Valentine. Members of the association sponsor promising people as someone's property. Here, talents can be bought up, and in the eyes of others, it is a noble help for young talents, but in reality, it was an ordinary slave trade. Orphans often ended up here, and if someone refused to participate and wanted to leave the association, the owner demanded that he return all the funds spent on him for the entire time, and of course, no one could pay off such a huge debt. The children grew up alone in terrible conditions, and the main character of the novel, Axel Valentine, was a similar talent who lived in the association for a long time. Axel's owner, Robert Black, was a villain who manipulated the boy and made money from him. However, Axel did not mind and trusted Robert as his adoptive father. But in return for this devotion, Axel was deceived. As a result, he barely survived and escaped, and in the future he took revenge on the association and killed Robert. That's what the novel was like. Ariadne wanted to help the main character, save him from association, because if everything goes according to the original plot, the world will be destroyed and everyone will die, including Ariadne herself. But the main character can save the world. He had the ability to return to the past, which he could activate at a moment of extreme danger. Axel returned numerous times and eventually became distraught and therefore unable to correct the ending. While Ariadne was working out a plan to rescue Axel, there was a knock on her room. It was Simon Dinette, the secretary whom Rebecca had found. Judging by the documents, he was reliable and unusually loyal to money, but Ariadne was glad that she chose him. His work was done perfectly as always. It turns out that in order to make the hero strong but not harm him, it was necessary to steal the role of Robert Black. It was necessary to become the person who led Axel and then betrayed him. To fill this role, Ariadne ordered Simon to buy out Robert's share in the association, and as a result, she was able to see a list of everyone who was under his protection, and Axel's contract was also among the papers. Now Ariadne needed to provide Axel with the best, give him tasks, and even betray him, because that was the only way he could awaken, and she didn't want to do that. But it was the only way out. The girl ordered Simon to continue to follow her instructions and act on behalf of a member of the association, while hiding their connection. Simon promised that no one would know that he was working for an 8-year-old lady. In the meantime, sales of the elixir began. Simon also took care of everything. If anyone wants to find out who supplies the elixir, then all roads will lead to Duke Eldir. He will try to get rid of the elixir on the black market, and everyone will think that the recipe belongs to him. No one will even think that the recipe was provided by an 8-year-old child. Simon also offered to use slaves for sales, but Ariadne flatly refused due to memories of her past life. In Weaver, the only way to make money was by hunting, so the girl suggested creating special jobs for slaves. If people start working for them, the economy will develop due to constant money turnover. Simon was surprised because at first he thought Garcia was joking. But every time he followed this girl's train of thought, he began to doubt that she was really a child. And although he originally came here for the money, now he wholeheartedly wanted to serve his stunning lady. Meanwhile, at the Black Estate, the guard informed Axel that his master had changed, which the guy was very surprised because he had not even received the first task. The guard handed him a book with a burgundy cover and told him that his new master had told him to read it before his first task. Axel was pleasantly surprised. It turns out that he will still be given a job? The guard cryptically added that he could have shared information about his mission, but did not, and Axel realized that he himself knew nothing about it. The guard also said that all instructions for Axel would come through a representative, and the guy did not understand at all what this meant. He didn't understand anything at all and looked angrily at the book, The Boy with Red Eyes. The story of a young man who was bought because of the color of his eyes, of a child who was constantly surrounded by flames. Wherever he went, the fire followed him on his heels. It was quite a sad story. His eyes were yellow in the center and scarlet at the edges, like tongues of flame, and spirits born of fire always haunted him because of them. Axel read this book as a child and did not understand why he needed this book. Suddenly, a fair-haired man approached the guy and said that he would be his teacher, who had been hired by Adrian Black. He led Axel along, saying that he had a lot to learn, and for the boy this was completely illogical, because only nobles received such training. He could not understand what his new master was trying to achieve. During his lessons, he was told legends that spirits are usually born from the earth and the sun, but after fires, fire spirits can appear. Unlike the spirits of the earth and the sun, they are weak and die as soon as the flame goes out. But one day, these weak spirits surpassed the ordinary ones, and hundreds of fire spirits followed one, and then everything plunged into chaos. People named their leader Nightmare. Axel looked carefully at the images of spirits. It was a wolf with golden horns. Many tried to tame him, but no one succeeded. So the teacher advised the boy to run as far as possible if he suddenly saw him. After all, Axel had red eyes, and fire spirits love people with such eyes. Suddenly, Simon burst into the classroom. He was in a hurry. He handed Axel a small envelope containing his first assignment. According to it, the guy needed to collect 7 colored crystals from Crystal Lake in the Great Desert, and at the bottom there was a signature, Adrian Black. Axel immediately set out to carry out the task, noting that his owner had equipped him with the best quality tools. He had heard about the crystals he needed to find in class, so they were still useful. He also discovered that the envelope contained another small letter on black paper, which Axel should only open as a last resort. And while he was looking at it, suddenly he heard a strange sound behind him. It was Nightmare, that same fiery spirit along with his flock. Axel rushed forward, wondering what to do as he ran, when suddenly he saw a mountain in front of him. He climbed it, but realized that the spirits were still pursuing him and he had nowhere to run. The voices echoed the guy that his eyes were like tongues of flame, and they, spirits born of fire, would always haunt him. Meanwhile, Ariadne was thinking that Axel had most likely already set off on his first mission. In the original story, Axel's errands were always burned. The association members wanted to isolate him and placed bets on whether the boy would survive or not. But one day, Robert was forced to use Axel in the fire mission, which was one of the important events in the development of the hero. Axel was a good swordsman, since his adoptive father, a former commander of the Knights, taught him everything he knew, and now the hero only had to survive. The spirits continued to howl. Axel found it hard to breathe, and the voices continued to echo his flame-colored eyes. The guy flew into a rage. He was ready to tear out his eyes and give them to the spirits, if only they would leave him alone. And then he remembered the letter, which needed to be opened only as a last resort. It said that red-eyed children die first, but Axel must not fall. He must aim at the leader. The letter also contained a fairy tale about a red-eyed boy who was tied to a pole in the center of the village. But later, everything around was engulfed in flames, and the boy emerged from the fire as if nothing had happened. All this looked like fiction to Axel, but at that moment, a fiery raven flew over him and touched the boy's hand with its wing. His clothes were burned, but his skin remained untouched. And then Axel realized that thanks to his eyes, he would not burn. He was told to defeat the leader. He grabbed his sword in his hands and jumped into the fiery creatures right from the cliff. He had to conquer their leader. It was so hot that his father's sword simply melted in the boy's hands. It was real hell. But Axel was already standing right in front of Nightmare and realized that he had to overcome his fear. He remembered his father's words that the easiest way to tame a beast is to climb on it and not let go until the beast submits. Axel grabbed the fiery fur of the beast and climbed onto it, but it didn't even move. He had to force him to submit to him. And then the boy grabbed his horn. The beast howled and rushed forward. He was a top-level spirit beast, much stronger than his own kind. Axel grabbed the Nightmare's horn, denying his death with all his rage, because he had to fulfill his father's will. Meanwhile, Ariadne was in a carriage near a high tower. She was very worried about Axel. Her grandfather Solon, Simon, and Veronica were with her. Solon and Rebecca knew that Arya was Axel's patron, and the magic tower where the map stood was located next to the desert, so the girl could see for herself how Axel would cope with the task. Ariadne managed to stay with her grandfather for only a short time. Soon his students arrived, and Solon had to leave with them for classes. Left alone, Arya thought that Axel could not burn, so most likely he was able to tame the spirit. But could the plot have changed due to her intervention? The girl tried to arrange everything in the same way as in the original, but there were many differences. She prepared a letter for him with a little hint. In the original, Axel barely survived, and only then did he realize the peculiarity of his eyes, and the only way to hint him about it was that letter. But did he read it? After all, no matter how strong the main character is, Axel was only 12 years old. Ariadne's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden flash in the sky. A moment later, Axel appeared from there riding Nightmare. A smile lit up Arya's face, but now was not the right time to meet. Simon went to him to find out how he coped with the assignment. Arya remained inside the carriage and asked Veronica not to leave either. A huge, fiery wolf towered over Nam Simon, and after a couple of moments, Axel jumped off it. He headed towards Simon and Jalen, intending to see his master. His rage knew no bounds. He shouted Adrian's name, shouted that he knew everything. He was furious that his owner sent him on such a mission, and Ariadne just watched him with sadness in her eyes. No matter how angry the main character was, Arya could not reveal her identity. She did everything for him, but this step was too drastic, and now he is angry. At that moment, Axel fell to the ground, apparently losing consciousness from fatigue, but Ariadne was determined. This time, he would definitely not lose his sight. Simon told the girl that the guy was very dehydrated, but he just needed time, and he would definitely get better. Arya promised the assistant to double his salary if Axel recovered faster, and of course this gave the man even more motivation to save the boy. But he was concerned that a 12-year-old boy taming Nightmare might attract unwanted attention, but Ariadne assured him that everything would be fine. The necklace given by the Chess Association records what happens during the tasks. If the Chess Association does some digging, they will find out everything, and then Axel may become a slave. He will not be allowed to receive the title of knight. However, Axel was able to make the first move. He has a lot to do during further assignments, and Arya can only try to help. However, she didn't know if her actions mattered, so she could only wait and watch. But time took its course, and 4 years have already passed since the Nightmare was tamed. Ariadne still performed under the name of the Chess Association member, Adrian Black, while watching the growth of the main character, Axel Valentine. Lucy entered the girls' room, saying that the gentleman had invited the young lady for a walk. Ariadne turned around, and it was no longer a baby. It was already a young 12-year-old girl. But how will her fate turn out next? Will she be able to change her fate and save the whole world? Or were 4 years of her efforts in vain?